Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are going to proceed with our Board of Health meeting. So welcome to the October 5th, 2022 Board of Health. With that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Are there any changes to the agenda that's presented? Seeing none, if I could have a mover and seconder then. Councillor Martin, seconded by, Board Member Michelle. All those in favor? That is carried. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, no consents, no early close, no deputations. We just have the presentation from Dr. Strauss, our Medical Officer of Health. Welcome, Dr. Strauss.
Thank you, Chair Chaub. So in your agendas, you'll find my report to the Health and Social Services Advisory Committee. The remarks I'm about to be delivering are largely based on that report. I have reordered them because there's news on the last item. So I'd like to speak to you first about the issue of public health restructuring. There have been persistent rumors going on. These rumors intensified after the last provincial election. The public health units would soon be reorganized and consolidated. It has been presumed that there would be fewer MOHs once the restructuring was done. I had not formally alerted either this board or the advisory council about these rumors because they were just rumors. Last month, it was disclosed to me by a senior ministry official that a final proposal for restructuring had been put forward and lied on the minister's desk. Late yesterday afternoon, Colleen Keel, who I understand to be the ministry's director of strategy and planning, announced in a meeting to us, which I understand to be an open meeting, that any plans for public health restructuring have now been put off until the end of respiratory virus season. So there is not closure on this point at this time. And so I had intended to, I had intended to have closure on this point at this time. And in my reflections in terms of what I was going to say to this council, I had prepared something of a farewell. I think it is, it still is appropriate to do that, though, because I understand the composition of this board may be changed the next time we meet. So you'll excuse me if I have a few reflective points to put in. The second point remains the same, which is on monkeypox. We have not had a case of monkeypox in Halden and Norfolk for over 2 months. This is consistent with the provincial trend. There is in your agenda package included a graph of the cases in Ontario. It's very clearly down. This is very welcome news. I'm grateful to every member of this community who managed their risk and got vaccinated. I'm very grateful to all of the fine work that folks at the Public Health Unit did in activating and planning our local response. So now we go to my last point, which I've now renamed in this report COVID-19 and farewells. So there is increasing interest in, quote, the end of the pandemic in the news media, since such was declared by the US president 2 weeks ago. I believe we've talked about this at previous meetings, but to recap, pandemic is defined as an epidemic covering most of the globe. Quatra's Dictionary of Epidemiology defines epidemic this way. Epidemic is the occurrence in a community or region of cases of an illness, specific health-related behavior, or other health-related events clearly in excess of normal expectancy. I'll leave the rest of the definition there. You can peruse it if you like. But ultimately, the definition depends on what one would normally expect. And that's why there's likely to be significant disagreement on this point. Even as the virus changes, so might our expectations of its behavior. Furthermore, every jurisdiction and every person in that jurisdiction might have different expectations. My expectation, which I disclosed to this body after the large winter Omicron wave, was that we would continue to see smaller waves come and go, and that each would stress our healthcare systems less than the last. You will find included a chart of COVID hospital admissions since January 2020. Please note that this chart does not delineate between incidental COVID positive tests and COVID causing the admission. So I would say that since March, the virus has met my expectations, which I am comfortable to say that it no longer meets the strict definition of a pandemic. I stress, however, that this does not mean that COVID is eradicated. It never will be, nor that we should stop doing everything in our power to prevent and treat significant illness that arises out of COVID infection. As more people, such as the US president, find that the virus is meeting their expectations, more people will acknowledge the end of the pandemic. This is a social cultural process and not a biological process. I do not expect a Canadian declaration of the pandemic being over, but I do note that all of our border measures lapsed on October 1st. As we conclude the pandemic period, I have been interested to evaluate the outcome of my approach to battling it in this jurisdiction. As this board is well aware, I advocated for a traditional public health approach that emphasized individual consent and evaluation of the scientific evidence base, rather than a post-2020 kitchen sink approach that emphasized cumbersome mandates and closures. To this end, in terms of my own personal reflection and professional growth, I personally commissioned Hawkins Consulting Corporation, an actuarial firm, to prepare a report on COVID-19 mortality in Halton, Norfolk, neighboring communities, and the province. The report includes data up to September 1st, 2022. Reports are attached. Here are some critical tables and my briefing notes. As you see, Halton, Norfolk has done very well, with 30% fewer COVID deaths than the provincial average standardized for age. Previously, I had presented charts to the board comparing Halton, Norfolk mortality to our rural neighbors, Lambton, Southwestern, Huron, Perth, Chatham, Kent. The government website that allowed me to prepare those charts has since been decommissioned. Going over the raw data myself, I can say that we now have the lowest COVID-19 mortality of all these regions. This is what I came here to do, and I'm grateful to the community for the opportunity to do it. When I started at the health unit, I had just finished my first year of a PhD in the philosophy of science at the University of Toronto. So I hope you'll forgive me if I get philosophical for a moment reflecting on my time here. Expertise, qualifications, and credentials have become very peculiar words over the last 2 years, and I would like to speak a bit about this. After I was appointed acting MOH by this body, there was a concerted media effort to reverse your decision. This effort, as far as I could tell, mostly came from downtown Toronto. You might imagine that that period of time was about the most intense in my life. I've since had the opportunity and pleasure of meeting all sorts of community members. I've met with priests, migrant workers, physicians, and nurse colleagues, small business owners, factory managers, a number of hockey moms, retirees, teachers, and many, many farmers. I've learned a lot from all of them, and I'm grateful to all of them. But it was particularly in discussion with farmers where I frankly became in awe of their expertise. I spent 12 years at university to become a critical care doctor, and then I stuck around to teach afterwards. There's not a lot of dirt under my fingernails. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit emotional. It strikes me that you could spend your whole life in the ivory tower concocting theories and constructing models to support those theories. One could publish a bunch of papers about those theories and go to conferences promoting those theories. However, if that theory never gets tested against reality, it could well be erroneous. As a farmer, you can make up theories about how to grow more asparagus, and you get to find out real fast if your theory works or not. If your theory is untrue, there won't be any asparagus come harvest, and you might lose the farm. The sort of collision between theory and reality is where true expertise comes from. It is where common sense comes from. Personally, I learned far more in my first year of practice as a physician than in my last year of training. I do not think it is an accident that a community with a thoroughly agricultural character decided to stand up to the downtown Toronto media, reject their unproven theories, and instead go with a reality-based common sense approach. I will forever be in awe of the courage and wisdom that took. So I am so thankful to this board. I'm very thankful to the people of Halton. So thanks. That's I did not mean to get that emotional. Happy to take your questions, though.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Strauss. Any questions from council, board members? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Chop, or thank you, Chair Chop, through you to Dr. Strauss. With that, yeah, that was a bit of a twist in terms of the amalgamation information and then it kind of being put on hold. So when they're talking, because obviously a lot of people are aware of this possibility and there's concerns about our rural needs not being met when there are amalgamations that occur. So you mentioned that it's at the end of the respiratory virus season. So what kind of, since you're the doctor, what kind of timelines are we looking at?
I think that means till spring. April 1st is what maybe the date that I would circle for hearing more about that. And I just want to say I share the same concerns as you. In my previous talks, when we've talked about COVID-19 mortality and rural areas, and I went into some depth about how public health in rural areas is very different. So I hope that there is engagement and advocacy along these lines. And I will say that this board was very effective in advocacy when we talked about Paxlovid. And I can't recall if I wrote the letter and you signed it, or if we both signed it, but that letter was effective by my light. So I think it's nice that we can take a breath, and there will be a new board, and perhaps plans about advocacy and rural health issues can be considered more at that time.
Member Martin.
Thank you, Chair Chop. Through you to Dr. Strauss. In any of your conversations concerning amalgamation, are you hearing from other health units, other medical officers of health, from the rural perspective? Is that voice being articulated clearly, our concerns when these discussions come up, or are you finding that that was kind of an isolated experience and you were advocating alone?
I have to think about how to answer that, just in terms of, I've had many conversations with other MOHs. Some of those are in confidential settings. Some of them are not. So I have to think about what I can disclose and not disclose.
If I pose the question another way, in
Sure.
your opinion, do you think the message is well received or will be well received through previous discussions and or future discussions about concerns about urban health units and rural health units?
I think that those concerns will certainly be very well received in other rural health units. I think that this is top of mind for many rural health units. And that Paxlovid letter that we delivered to the minister, I do believe it was well received. And the aspect of rural care being appropriate to rural settings was a cornerstone of that letter, right? Because there was a push to have Paxlovid only available at these community assessment centers in Kitchener and Hamilton. And we wrote a letter about, well, that doesn't work in a rural setting. So I was really pleased with the ministry's action following that letter, which leads me to believe, I mean, I can't speak for the ministry, but yes, it seems that they are responsive to these issues when they're raised well.
Well, Heidi, I mean, you might be able to, we have, our concerns have been articulated in the past, and I think we've already heard from concerns from other rural areas as well. I think the concerns of the amalgamation are certainly out there.
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you to the board. I would say that in my work with health and social services, regardless of whether it's in public health, social services, employment, housing, or homelessness, that in Haldimand and Norfolk, we have been very strong advocates of the uniquenesses of rural service delivery and the importance to maintain rural service delivery in whatever plan moves forward. That is consistent.
Councilor Grandpaster, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, we did have some discussion at the committee level on the amalgamation, and Dr. Strauss wanted to expand a bit, but I don't think there's much fear of the amalgamation units as long as it's like kind, right? Like the fear is that we get swallowed up and absorbed by Hamilton and we don't have the representation level on the board to carry any sway, but to amalgamate with a more like kind, like with Elgin, with Brant County, with another rural jurisdiction. I don't think there's any fear in that, but the fear is that we just get swallowed up by somebody that a large urban center that has a totally different problems than what we have in the rural area. Dr. Strauss wants to comment on that.
I think my views are roughly in line with what you've just said. I am not what I said at the committee meeting was I'm not a politician. I don't know what the best way to voice concerns from one level of the government to another are. Maybe it looks something like that Paxlovid letter. I know that there was consultations that went on years ago before the pandemic, before I started in this job. I don't know if this board was involved in those consultations or not, frankly. So I don't know if it's felt that this board has already said its piece, or if this board or the board next month wants to reiterate its piece. But I really leave it to this body to decide how they want to approach it.
Madam Chair, if I could just add to that through you to the board, I think that, you know, at this time, we have shared the information that we have with the board. As more information becomes available, we will certainly share it with the board. The board is aware that, you know, when the health unit receives communications from our provincial association, we share that with the board. And so if there are any advocacy letters or things that our provincial association are doing, we will certainly share that with the board, as well as any information coming from the ministry. And then with our assessment and recommendations on potential next steps that the board could consider as we go through this process.
Hey, Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we have not done so already, should we not perhaps be sending a letter to the Ontario Minister of Health or the Ministry of Health Minister suggesting that we wish to be aligned with similar like rural municipalities or rural boards of health?
So, Madam Mayor, through you to Councillor Columbus, I think that it would be, I would ask for the board's indulgence to go back and review any documents that we've gotten from our provincial association. Nothing comes to mind at this point about a draft letter that I would suggest today that you send. I think that it might be helpful. It would be my recommendation to the board that it would be helpful to have some additional information about where this plan is headed, if there is a plan coming. What we know right now is that everything has been paused until after the respiratory virus season. And we're committed to sharing additional information with you as it becomes available.
Councillor Van Den Rishi, go ahead. If
Through you, Madam Chair. The merit in being proactive, and because down the pipe, we know this is coming. Well, it's been delayed, but I think at the end of the day, I think that the province has a full intent to do this. So you don't think it's proactive to kind of stipulate where we would like to go?
If I can interrupt, Councillor Van Den Rishi, you weren't here at the time, but we have already sent a letter in the past articulating our position as the Board of Health. In your defense, you weren't here at the time, but that has already occurred.
Yeah, may I ask who you wanted to amalgamate with?
They were discussions that took place previously in closed session, but we have articulated our position as far as our concerns. We wanted our concerns to be known to the province. And we've articulated those on behalf of the board. That's about all I could say. Councillor Rapids.
Thank you, and through you. May I ask what implications such an amalgamation may have with regards to our Health and Social Services Advisory Board?
Madam Chair, through you to Board Member Rabbits. At the time that we know that there is a plan and what the plan is, staff would be doing a full operational assessment and would be coming back to Norfolk Council or the Board of Health, whichever is most applicable, with our assessment of any operational impacts. And if those discussions needed to be in closed session, then they would be in closed session. But at this point, that it is too early for me to be able to answer that question respectfully.
I think what the board needs to understand, I mean, this has been talked about by the province for some time. This isn't new. This was actively in the media prior to the pandemic. It looks as though it's going to be delayed. But when we think about it, I mean, we also don't want our staff getting concerned by all these conversations either, in the sense we're still going to have public health here locally. It's just may be a different format in the way that it's presented. So, you know, again, I think it's premature, like Heidi said, to jump the gun here until we get more information from the province. And they've been dangling this for some time and nothing has happened as of yet. So who knows when it could be or what that's going to look like. Any further questions from the board? I just want to say, I know the farewell, Matt, was kind of, it seems like a funny farewell, but you're not actually going anywhere. So it could be us going somewhere. But I am so thankful for you coming down to Haldeman, Norfolk as well, if I'm not up here to say that again. I really appreciate you stepping up. There wasn't a whole long lineup of people certainly wanting to be a medical officer of health during a pandemic, but the fact that you were willing to take on that challenge and to use an evidence-based approach, I commend you for it. I know it wasn't easy at times, so thank you. Anything further from the board? All right, with that then, just quickly, we'll go through the approval of the board minutes from September 6th.
Through the mayor, may we please?
Oh, sorry, receive
receive
presentations information. Thanks, Councillor Van Passen. Seconded by Councillor Rabbits. All those in favor? That's carried. Approval of the board minutes September 6th. Any errors or omissions? Mover and a seconder to approve. Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Huffman. All those in favor? That's carried. Items of communication. There's an information memo 9.1, the cancellation of the November 1st, 2022 Board of Health meeting. Are there any questions of the committee? Somebody wish to move the staff recommendation? Member Huffman, seconded by Member Taylor. All those in favor? That's carried. No staff reports or discussion items, no bylaws, no motions. Any notices of motion? I'm going to assume not, since that's the last of it. Any other business? All right, no closed session, and moving on to the confirming bylaw, which is 2022-11, BH being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Board of Health for the Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit at this regular Board of Health meeting held on the 5th day of October 2022. Member Huffman, thank you. Seconded by Member Michelli. All those in favor? That's carried. And finally, a motion to adjourn at 2:53 p.m. Member Huffman, seconded by Member Taylor. All those in favor? That's carried. So we will see you back in just a few minutes here, 3 p.m. for public hearings.